This isn't the story of a country that had it all. It's the story of a nation left in ruins, torn apart by war, crushed by poverty, and forgotten by the world. South Korea had no resources, no global power, and no reason to be noticed. All it had was a will to survive. Decades later, it would stun the world with K-pop, high-speed internet, and tech empires. It would win Oscars, dominate industries, and yes, even create Squid Game, a drama that struck a nerve across the planet, because for many, it felt a little too real. This is how South Korea didn't just rise, it redefined what a comeback looks like. After World War II, Korea was divided. The North, backed by the Soviet Union. The South was supported by the United States. A line was drawn at the 38th parallel. One nation split in two, with tension growing on both sides. In 1950, war broke out. North Korea invaded the South without warning. Tanks rolled in, towns fell, families ran for safety, but many didn't make it. The war spread fast, and the destruction was massive. The United States joined the fight. What started as a civil war turned into a global conflict. A battle between communism and democracy played out on Korean soil. Seoul was destroyed. It changed hands again and again. Each time, more buildings collapsed. More people died. By the end, the city was barely standing. Across the country, homes were gone. Factories were gone. Even food was hard to find. Civilians starved. Children begged on the streets. The country was falling apart. The war lasted 3 years. More than 2 million people died. Most were civilians. When the fighting stopped in 1953, there was no peace deal. Just a ceasefire and a country left in ruins. South Korea was one of the poorest places on earth. No economy, no infrastructure, just broken roads, broken lives, and a broken nation. But the war didn't destroy everything. What remained was the will to survive. In 1961, South Korea was in chaos. The government was weak, the economy was failing, and people were losing faith. Then came a turning point, a sudden military coup led by General Park Chung-hee. He took control of the country overnight. There were no elections, no public support, just tanks in the streets and orders from above. Park wasn't interested in speeches or politics. He believed South Korea didn't have time for that. The country was starving, stuck in poverty, and surrounded by threats. In his eyes, survival came first. Freedom could wait. Park ruled with absolute power. Dissent was crushed. Protests were met with force. But behind the iron rule was a single clear goal: to rebuild the economy. He launched a series of bold 5-year plans where the government decided everything: what industries to grow, where to invest, how to export. He studied Japan's model and copied it with precision. South Korea focused on manufacturing, steel, shipping, and later electronics. Park built highways, factories, ports, and power grids from the ground up. He gave loans to companies that followed his plan. Failure wasn't an option. The country had no resources, but it had discipline and a leader who demanded results. It wasn't fair, it wasn't free, but it started to work. Wages were still low, conditions were harsh, and many lived in fear of speaking out. But slowly, the economy began to move. Exports increased, jobs were created, streets once filled with rubble started to hum with industry. Park once said, "Democracy can wait. We need to eat first." And for millions, that message hit home. They didn't agree with everything he did, but they couldn't deny what they saw: a poor, broken country starting to rise. The seeds of what would later be called the miracle on the Han River were now in the ground. By the 1970s, South Korea had one goal: catch up with the developed world, fast. What began as survival under General Park turned into full-speed industrialization. The country shifted its focus to exports. It started building ships, producing steel, and manufacturing goods at a pace no one expected. South Korea didn't have oil or gold, but it had drive, discipline, and a hunger to grow. The world was still watching Japan, but South Korea was moving quietly, methodically, building its empire from scratch, piece by piece. At the center of this growth were the chaebols, giant, family-owned business empires that shaped the economy. These weren't small companies. They were monsters, built with government backing. Hyundai started with construction, then moved into cars and ships. Samsung began in groceries, but soon dominated electronics and semiconductors. LG followed with chemicals, appliances, and telecom. The government fed them with loans and contracts. In return, they pushed the country forward, creating jobs, increasing exports, and lifting millions out of poverty. Their success became the nation's success. Seoul transformed before the world's eyes. What had once been a war-torn city now turned into a center of trade, tech, and finance. Skyscrapers filled the skyline. Highways connected every corner of the country. The ports were booming. South Korea became a symbol of what fast, focused growth could achieve. The term miracle on the Han River became more than a nickname. It was a reality. GDP soared, education rates climbed, and global respect followed. A big part of this miracle was education. Parents sacrificed everything to send their kids to school. Children studied long hours, chasing dreams their grandparents could never imagine. This new generation became doctors, engineers, scientists, and CEOs. They weren't just surviving, they were shaping the future. Cities filled up, rural areas emptied out. The country moved from farmland to factories to the digital age in just a few decades. But all this growth came with a dark side. The chaebols held too much power. Workers were pushed to their limits. Wages stayed low, while profits soared. Labor rights were ignored. Protests were crushed. Strikes turned violent. The pressure to keep growing created cracks beneath the surface. South Korea was rising, but not without pain. Behind the headlines and skyscrapers, people were still fighting, not just for money, but for fairness, freedom, and dignity. By the 1990s, South Korea was ready for its next leap, not just in factories, but in ideas. The country began investing heavily in research, innovation, and digital infrastructure. While others were still adjusting to the internet age, Korea raced ahead. The government made sure that high-speed internet reached nearly every home. Seoul quickly became one of the most connected cities in the world. Technology was no longer just part of the economy, it became part of everyday life. Samsung and LG led the charge. These weren't just big companies anymore. They were global tech leaders. Samsung became a dominant force in smartphones, semiconductors, and display tech. LG broke ground in electronics, appliances, and communications. What once started as copying foreign products had now become full-blown innovation. Korea shifted from a fast follower to a country shaping the future. Its tech products didn't just fill shelves, they set the standard worldwide. This new era brought confidence. A younger generation was growing up in a nation that no longer saw itself as rebuilding. It saw itself as leading. Students studied AI, robotics, biotech, and design. Startups and research centers sprang up everywhere. From networks to smart cities, Korea embraced the future with speed and precision. They weren't just catching up anymore, they were building what came next. As one observer put it, they weren't just rebuilding, they were future-proofing. By the 2000s, South Korea wasn't just leading in tech, it was taking over the global stage with something even more powerful: culture. What started as local TV shows and pop songs slowly turned into a worldwide movement. It was called Hallyu, the Korean wave, and it hit with full force. K-pop groups like BTS and BLACKPINK didn't just top charts in Asia, they sold out stadiums in Los Angeles, London, and Paris. Their music, style, and message connected with millions, and their fans followed every move like it was history in the making. At the same time, K-dramas exploded in popularity. What once aired on local channels was now trending globally on platforms like Netflix. Shows like Squid Game, Crash Landing on You, and Extraordinary Attorney Woo weren't just watched, they became global events. Then came Parasite, a Korean film that didn't just break into Hollywood, it won the Oscar for Best Picture.
Parasite.
It was the first non-English film to do so, and it sent a clear message. South Korean stories had something the whole world wanted to hear: fashion, beauty, food, skincare. The influence kept growing. Korean trends shaped how people dressed, what they ate, and how they lived. From Seoul's neon-lit streets to Times Square's billboards, Korean culture wasn't just exported, it was worshipped. In just a few decades, South Korea had gone from survival to influence. It had turned war and poverty into power and pride, not just through machines or money, but through music, movies, and meaning. Beneath the shine of K-pop lights and billion-dollar tech lies a harder truth, one that doesn't make headlines as often. South Korea's rise came at a cost. The same discipline that built its economy now drives intense pressure in everyday life. From a young age, students are pushed to compete for grades, for college, for jobs. The pressure to succeed isn't just strong, it's constant. Failure isn't just disappointing, it's seen as shameful. For many, there's no space to breathe. This pressure stretches far beyond the classroom. In the workplace, long hours and strict hierarchies dominate. In society, beauty standards are unforgiving. Appearance, status, and perfection are expected, especially online. Plastic surgery is common, not for vanity, but for survival in a culture where image often defines opportunity. Mental health struggles are widespread, but rarely talked about. South Korea has one of the highest suicide rates among developed nations. Young people feel burnout before they've even started living. There's a saying in Korea, if you're not the best, you're invisible. And in many ways, that sums up the hidden burden behind the success. It's a country that's worked relentlessly to rise, but now faces a deeper challenge: healing. More Koreans are beginning to speak out, demand balance, and redefine what success really means. But it's a long road, because even in the world's most connected nation, many still feel painfully alone. When Squid Game hit screens, the world was shocked. A brutal contest of survival. Blood, betrayal, desperation. But for many in South Korea, it didn't feel like fiction. It felt like a reflection. Behind the masks and playgrounds was a deeper truth. A society where many feel like they're constantly competing, constantly drowning, crushed by debt, stuck in low-paying gig jobs, chasing a dream that always seems just out of reach. What looked like a violent game show was actually a mirror to real life. Today, many young Koreans carry student debt, face sky-high housing prices, and enter a job market that's brutally competitive. The gap between the rich and poor keeps growing. Owning a home in Seoul feels impossible. Even with education, hard work, and talent, success isn't guaranteed. And it's not just a Korean problem. That's why Squid Game resonated everywhere, because it showed what modern capitalism looks like when hope is replaced with survival. The playground may have been Korean, but the pain was global. South Korea has become a master of storytelling, not because it invents fantasy, but because it reveals truth. Through dramas, films, and music, it holds up a mirror to the pressures, inequalities, and questions so many around the world face. Squid Game wasn't just entertainment, it was a warning about a system that can turn real life into a race for survival. And it struck a nerve, not because it was extreme, but because it felt too real. South Korea's journey is one of the greatest turnarounds in modern history. From the ashes of war, it rose to become a global powerhouse in technology, entertainment, diplomacy, and more. Once reliant on foreign aid, it now gives aid. It sits at the table with world leaders, shapes global trends, and plays a key role between superpowers like the US and China. And yet, it hasn't forgotten the threats it still faces. From economic pressure at home to the constant tension with North Korea. It's a country full of contrasts, old wounds and new pride, deep traditions and cutting-edge innovation, harsh realities and high hopes. But if there's one thing that defines South Korea, it's this: resilience. Through every crisis, it adapted. Through every setback, it pushed forward. It didn't just survive history, it rewrote it. South Korea didn't just rise, it redefined what a comeback looks like. From culture to commerce, it's not just influencing the world, it's inspiring it. Because South Korea is more than a country, it's a phenomenon.